Hey everyone, we're back to talk more about AMD and why everyone's leaning towards them over Intel right now. Please click the subscribe button, and if you like this video, click thumbs up. If you don't like it, click thumbs down. Okay, so I've mentioned before the whole EPYC versus Threadripper discussion. I cracked it open a while back. You can see the video in my history. Today, though, we're going to look to update some of this information, give you a few more solid stats, and tell you what I'm doing right now with these processors. Later in this video, I'm actually going to go bring up the actual processor types, and I'll give you the SKUs so that you can order these yourself. So with AMD, what it comes down to is speed and cores. Let's talk about speed first. Look, speed matters, especially to effects artists, game developers. Having the highest frequency processor is really what counts. And having a lot of cores isn't necessarily what they're so focused on. Now, if you've seen the core-to-core benchmarks out there, there's countless examples where AMD is simply overtaking Intel core for core. It's started off in the 20-30%, but we're seeing some that go much higher. I'm not going to go over all the benchmarks now because that's sort of already been talked about, and there's a million videos on that, and there's a million studies on that. It's simply a foregone conclusion in my world that the AMD is performing better than the Intel procs that are coming out right now. And then there's the fact that there are so many cores. The Threadripper Pro, the highest end of the Threadripper Pro, has 64 cores. That means you can run 128 threads simultaneously on a single processor. The EPYC processor that we use in our render machines, you can have the same thing, up to 64 cores, but you can have two processors in one host. So this becomes a massive core discussion. So again, now that you're combining these high-speed processors with these really high core counts, it gets pretty nuts. So in our data center where we have our render farm, we have in a 2U footprint 512 cores of processing power. That means we're able to put over 7,000 cores in a single rack. And that used to be a whole farm just years ago. Now is literally just one rack of render. Now, like I said before, and like I've said in other videos, if you haven't watched my videos on what's a render farm or how to manage a render farm, cores matter. You want to be able to run as many jobs simultaneously as you can. And the reality is with these newest renderers is you can run all the cores on one job, or you can run many jobs across the cores, and you're going to get near linear results from these renderers. And what I mean by that is if you double the number of cores on a particular latest lighting render like V-Ray or RenderMan, you're going to see half the speed. And if you double the cores again, you're going to see half the speed again. It's not perfectly linear, but compared to the drop-off curves we used to see in the past, it's effectively linear. So this means you can take these really high core count render machines and either put the jobs that have to deliver today to client on these machines with 1 or 2 frames per machine, and they just crank through at lightning speed. Or you can open it up to the farm in general, and all your artists can run their jobs simultaneously, getting their first frames back at the earliest possible stage. So this is why we favor these. This is why we're putting them in our render farms across basically Canada and the United States. And this is why our clients are buying and renting them now. They're just too many cores per rack to argue with, right? Now, I will be doing a video soon. We're going to dive into one of those rack-mounted render boxes, and we'll do a little tour of what the architecture looks like. But now let's go ahead and talk about workstations. Now, I'm talking about a render farm, right? But I also mentioned desktops. As a 15-year veteran in rendering, I simply look at desktops as render machines that are loaned to the artist during the daytime. The reality is desktops sit there unused from 12 to 18 hours a day, not to mention Sundays and Saturdays. So for my preference, I always like to load the most amount of cores on a desktop, even if every artist isn't going to utilize those cores to their full extent. This is because I see it as a render farm for more than half of a week's time. Again, I've seen 10-20% capacity increase to a studio's render farm by fully utilizing their desktop farm. I'll give 2 caveats about this. One, the closer you get to delivery, the less those machines will be available to your render farm because artists start working more and more overtime. And 2, there is a cost. It's a small cost, but it is measurable, and artists don't see it as small. when they have to log out and log back in, if they don't have an environment that rebuilds all of their apps and everything back to where they left off, sort of a sleep mode, if you will, for that machine, it can often frustrate artists to have to spend the first 10 or 15 minutes of their workday rebuilding where they left off the night before. So I recognize those costs, but the reality is those machines are extremely expensive and they're extremely valuable to the studio, and that cost, in my opinion, is just the cost we have to pay to use your render machine as a desktop unit. For desktops, there's an ideal choice in my mind, and that's the Threadripper Pro 3090WX. And really, it's not just because it has so many cores, but it also has a big differential between what it runs at and what you can boost it to. So really, you can boost it all the way up to 4.2 gigahertz of speed, although it runs at a base rate of 2.7. So again, the higher core counts tend to run as a base rate lower because parallelization is often more productive than just speed increases. But however, you can crank these things up if you have a use case. Now, what are these use cases? I mentioned it a little bit before. In the visual effects and animation world, sims are a classic example where the gigahertz increase in frequency is going to be a big benefit versus having more cores. You'll also find jobs like Nuke and such. Maybe it's changing soon, but currently they don't really multi-thread well, and you'll find other processes that just don't multi-thread well. So in these cases, having speed is what matters. So the Threadripper Pro with the 64 cores has all the cores, and you can crank the speed when you need to. Of course, it's, the premium chip, it's the top level, but I'm generally from the mindset of cry once, buy once. Buy the proper thing the first time, and then you have something you can continue to grow into over the 3 to 5 year lifespan of that computer. So it's best to pay up front and then amortize the benefits over the years versus year 2 already feeling like you're behind the curve. So the next one down, though, is 2 different levels. Now, these are the Threadripper Pro 3975WX and the 3955WX. You'll find these come in 32 core and 16 core, respectively. And these start off, though, as a base rate of 3.5 and 3.9 gigahertz. So that's, fast all the time. You'll see a lot of these getting out there as more of the compromise choice, or people who want to not necessarily go all the way with the most expensive chip, but still get a lot of cores and get a lot of speed. I mean, the fact that we're considering 16 cores sort of the low core count just speaks to the fact that the game has changed with what we're expecting out of a machine. I really never imagined that we would have 512 cores in a 2U footprint. So all this cutting edge tech from AMD, just like the stuff from NVIDIA with all the Ampere cards coming in, it's great that the original OEMs are generating this new product, whether it's the chip manufacturers, the video card manufacturers, but then the computer manufacturers have to actually build machines that can use that new technology. And there's always a big gap, a lag there between the announcement of new technology and the deployment of that new technology. Now, behind the scenes, I can promise you that these manufacturers are talking, and NVIDIA is talking to Lenovo and Dell and all these companies to make sure that as they're releasing products, there's a roadmap already internally for them to build the computers for these products. I mean, it doesn't do any good for NVIDIA to release a card that nobody can plug into their computer. So Lenovo was really on the cutting edge of this. So you saw me mention this in my last AMD video, and it's even more true today, that the Lenovo P620 was sort of the first entrant in that could use not only the Threadripper Pros, but could also use the Ampere technology that hadn't even come out yet when the Lenovo's were released. They have the 4th generation PCIe, so they can handle the new Ampere cards, and they can even handle multiple Ampere cards in the same box. So they were out of the gate the right choice. I know that they're now deployed to many studios. I've sold countless of these. I'm currently selling countless of these, and they're just a standard new box that you're going to see in all the studios. This Lenovo P620 really took the studios by storm, and it's now starting to spread to the floors. It's also really big in virtual production. So we've been deploying these Lenovo P620s also to virtual production, and they're now powering some of the largest virtual production video walls in production right now. So it's a powerhouse. It comes with a rack kit if you need to throw it on its side and stick it into a rack, especially out there in the virtual production environment. That's important. But like I said, they're a first entrant. Other folks are coming on now. You can get the Threadripper Pro in some other SKUs. More machines are coming out that are able to handle the Ampere. But again, this is the value of being a first entrant. While all these other companies are now coming out with their first rollouts of the machines that can handle the Threadripper Pros and the Amperes, you can look at Lenovo's line. They've now built a whole line of machines that can handle these types of cards and processors. So again, the value of being the first entrant, kudos to Lenovo for being there. And they're reaping the rewards through selling all these machines. You can look out there on a few different websites. I know on CDW, you can just buy it right off the shelf right there, or you can call in and talk about custom building them, right? That's the nice thing about the Lenovo's is you can just buy them off the shelf, pre-built with Threadrippers and NVIDIA cards, or you can have them tweaked. Sometimes now we're starting to look at up in the network cards. 10 gig, like I've said in other videos, 10 gigabit, consider that the standard going forward, but we are starting to think about putting some network cards with fiber getting up into the 25, the 40s, maybe the hundreds over the next year with some of these machines, because they can generate so much data that you need to make sure the pipe can handle it downstream. So as we build these new next generation machines, we're going to have to start thinking about the upward pressure on the network, on the disk. So when all these high capacity, high intensity machines start pounding the disk and the network, we need to make sure downstream they're able to handle all of this throughput. That's why at the Studio Cloud, where we rent out these render nodes, we've been putting in 10 gig at the machine, and we're now looking at having 100 gig at top of rack, just to make sure that whatever our clients have on the other end, our pipe will match theirs. So better to shoot for 100 these days if you're building infrastructure. That's just the new reality. So let's go over the stats really quick. If we take a look at the ones I mentioned here today, again, I always stand by this EPYC3080 because my primary world is rendering. You'll see it has the 64 cores. You can run 128 threads. It has a lower base spec for sure, because it's more focused on having, two sets of 64 cores in a box. You got to keep that cool, but you can boost it up as needed, and I suggest some of you do. It has a very high potential boost count of going up to 165%, so it allows for a lot of headroom, and it has 256 megabyte L3 cache. Like all of these, you're going to see they have 128 Gen 4 PCIe, and the RAM is DRAM 8-channel DDR for 3200 compatible. So let's go on down now. Let's look at the ones that go into desktops. Again, the EPYC is for servers. The Threadripper is going to go in desktops. And the Threadripper 3995WX, like my last video, I still stand by that one. 64 cores, 128, just like the EPYC. But this one has a faster base frequency. It's 2.7. You can crank it up to 4.2. Like I said, this one has the biggest spread of the desktops, and you can crank it all the way up to what those lower core count machines can run at peak as well. 256 megabyte L3 cache. Another reason to favor this chip is that little factor stands out from the other ones. And again, you'll see PCIe and DRAMs all the same with all these. We go down to the 3975WX. This is where you start to see the reduction in core counts, but the corresponding increase in base frequency, and you do have the ability to boost it. So there is 100, got a 20% overhead there you can boost up to. You'll see this is where the L3 cache drops down to 128 megabytes, and the Threadripper Pro 3955WX. This is probably the ones you'll see deployed at maybe very specific use cases, either large groups of artists where they need to get the cost down on the chip, or if they have specific high base speed needs for those users, and they can use those better than more cores. There's an argument to be made for this end as well. Not a lot of boost available to you. This one only has a 10% overhead of boost available. Like I mentioned before, they all have the PCIe 128 Gen 4, and DRAM is of the highest caliber. So what kind of AMD procs did you buy, or are you looking to buy, and why are you looking at them? I'd love to hear your thoughts as to why you're choosing one or the other. I'd love to hear your comments. Do you think I'm wrong? I'd like to hear that too. Again, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. I want to hear your feedback. Thanks for your time, and stay tuned for one of those grand tours of the EPYC server that we're now rendering on. I'm going to go ahead and won't do a full teardown, but we're going to pop one out and maybe take a look at it with one of the operations specialists who install these machines all the time. So, thanks everyone. And to all the artists, on behalf of all the render managers, please log out of your machine tonight so we can add it to the render farm. Thanks.